Alright, so I finally got the chance to play Throne of Liberty. The open beta for the global version of the game was live for almost a full week, running from Thursday, July 18th until Wednesday the 24th, thanks to a last-minute 24-hour extension. Played most of those days exploring the game, trying the different types of content, checking out the progression systems, and leveling up. Got my character to max level. It took me a while, but I got there, and in the process was able to see not everything, but a fair bit of what Throne of Liberty has to offer. And you know what? How do I put this? Anytime a new MMO comes out, I have a pretty simple method of figuring out whether or not I'm enjoying the game. Basically, if the first day of playing flies by and then come day 2, I can't wait to hop back in, that's a great sign. Like if I wake up extra early in the morning, pumped to play again, literally jumping out of bed, when that happens, I can confidently say, yes, I am enjoying it. And if any MMO is going to stand a chance at keeping me engaged longer term, it at the very least has to do that. Like if I am not hyped and rearing to go come day 2, the game stands no chance at keeping me entertained 2 weeks later, right? Now, in the case of my time with Throne of Liberty, I wanted to stop playing about halfway through my first day, and by the end of when day 6 rolled around, I was certainly ready to play something else. Now, no one's forcing me to play, right? Of course not. But I love MMOs as a genre. I want to give each of these games a fair shake. And I also want my coverage to be somewhat competent. Like, I don't need to be an expert with 200 plus hours in every game, but I at least want to play enough to really see if there is something in there that I can enjoy. And there are stuff I like about Throne and Liberty, but there is more things that I haven't. This game will have an audience. I have no doubt about that, like without question. After all, there are very few options out there for fans who want massive scale PvP focused throne war simulators. Games in this subgenre of MMO do not come by very often, and so I suspect people who really like this style of game, they will put up with Throne and Liberty's various flaws because, again, there's really not a lot of options and this game isn't that terrible. But if you are just a regular MMO player who isn't passionate about large scale PvP guild battles, from what I've played so far, I just don't think Throne and Liberty is quite good enough or has enough variety on offer to keep you playing for very long. Or I will at least just say personally, this is the case for me. I will play this game again when it launches, but I think it will be like 1 week tops. So as for an overview, what is this game? Well, the structure of Throne and Liberty is pretty straightforward. It is a seamless open world MMO. You start in one corner of the map, following the main story quest, then takes you through each of the game's various zones, in which you will complete the typical mix of tasks and objectives, killing enemies, collecting objects, fetching things for quest givers, and speaking to NPCs. Now, while you're doing this and you're going around, you're going to see a metric ton of other players in the world. This is one of the game's strengths. You'll also at times visit several towns and camps scattered about with NPCs and vendors for the game's many different crafting and progression systems. Instead of picking a class, the game actually uses a weapon-based system, so you can equip 2 weapons at a time. Each come with their own predetermined skills from which you will select the ones you want to use. Gear comes with several stat options for supporting your build, where you choose pieces with a mix of the various offensive and defensive traits that you want. All of the gear, weapons, as well as the skills can be enhanced through various means. They each have their own form of progression, but the basic rundown is you will use items that you collect by playing and then power up those things, leveling them up and making them all stronger. Beyond the main story and side quests, there are also open world events of various kinds where you and however many other players on your server work together and even at times compete to complete different tasks. These range from things like killing basic enemies and collecting objects, or even taking on larger world bosses. As for structured PvE, well, there's not much, but there are a few options. There is Taydel's Tower, which is this solo boss challenge tower climb with 20 floors for you to work through. There are co-op dungeons, which are the typical group dungeon MMO content, with 3 of them that you can do while you're leveling up, and then 6 available at the max level of 50. And then there's even open world dungeons, which are sort of like the public dungeons in Elder Scrolls Online. They are open to all. You'll see a bunch of people running around as you go in there. It's just non-instance dungeons, basically. Go in, clear trash, and fight bosses. And then there is, of course, the PvP. This is the primary focus of this game. So those open dungeons that I mentioned, they are safe during the daytime, but when the server turns to night, they are flagged for full open PvP. Also, the zones in the game will periodically be flagged for conflict, during which which open world PvP is enabled. I learned this by accident as I was trying to complete some contracts. I had two people walk up behind me and just gank me all of a sudden. Funny enough too, I didn't even realize what was happening until I had like a third of my health left. At first I thought they were helping me kill my target, but nope, that's not what was taking place. And then beyond that, the game does have various forms of organized PvP with events like castle sieges and various guild wars in the open world. So playing through the game will have you following the main story quests, doing some side quests and open world events as you move through the zones, while also completing contracts, which are sort of like dailies. You'll run the handful of dungeons, both the co-op ones and the open world ones, and then do PvP whenever a zone flips over or it's nighttime in one of those open world dungeons. And also, while you're leveling and when you're at max, you are constantly working on your progression, leveling up and powering up your weapons, gear, as well as your skills to get stronger. And if you're playing the game the proper way, at some point you're gonna need to join a guild to take part in the large-scale guild activities and PvP, because frankly, if you are a solo player or a PvE focused player, you're pretty much SOL and won't have much to do in this game. This is a large scale guild focused PvP focused game at its very core. So that is the basic high level overview of Throne and Liberty. Now let's go ahead and dive into my thoughts on the game. Let's start with the positive, shall we? So for one, the visuals. This game looks fantastic across the board. I think the visual presentation of just about everything is really impressive. Like, I love the look of the world, environments, and structures in the game. You've got a good variety of biome types, like big open grassy fields, dense forest, large mountains, deserts, there's underground caverns, and dark dungeons. Many of these areas and zones are also dotted by camps and towns with medieval inspired architecture, and I think it all looks really good. Like, this is just a pretty game from an environmental standpoint. Also, the draw distance, how far you can see objects and characters still rendered in, and how far in the distance you can see in the game, it is really impressive. Like, this is a big world, it's fully seamless, you can see really far, there's a lot of people, and it all looks really good. I also appreciate the lighting and coloring. The game's got a fair bit of saturation to it, which is nice, not too common in many modern MMOs. And just as impressive have been the character animations, the spells and attacks. I personally played as this paladin type class using a sword and shield with a wand offhand, and this let me play as like a tank, a healer, and also have some decent damage with dots and AoE attacks. And some of the stuff is just really nice looking, like some really good looking animations and attacks, especially the spell casting, some of the healing abilities. I think it looks really good. It's got a bit of pop to it, but it's not overly flashy. I like it. Visually, this game looks great. Really no complaints there. The player count as well. This is awesome. Tons of players running around everywhere, especially on day one. The game felt really alive. Now, this quickly changed as the player counts plummeted to nearly 50% on the second day and have just kept going down from there. But man, on that very first day, everything was popping, right? Like, there was tons of people loaded everywhere, people standing around the crafting and vendor NPCs in town. The first couple of zones were full of players fighting enemies at the major quest and contract hotspots. There's also no mob tagging, and the spawn rates were super high. Enemies constantly popping in, so there wasn't an issue here. Just tons of enemies, tons of players attacking those enemies and casting spells. It looked good. Like, my server felt jam-packed on that first day, and that was great. This is what an MMO launch should feel like, and there's a real nice sense of community that happens there when you see all these people playing the game simultaneously. And what was even more impressive with all of that stuff in mind was the performance. Like, this game ran exceptionally well, which was so impressive considering how good the visuals are, considering how far you can see and the draw distance of rendering, and the sheer quantity of players, enemies, and NPCs all around you. The fact that this game ran so smoothly pretty much blew me away. Like, I don't recall any significant frame drops or performance issues the entire time I played. Nothing. It was buttery smooth, which is just a real nice change of pace from what you're used to in open world MMOs that look good when a lot of players are in a single area. Normally, this is a recipe for performance drops and or server issues like rubber banding. I saw none of that the whole time playing, which again was great and impressive. I also enjoyed some of the open world content. These are basically what amount to public events with a bit of competition rolled in. So there are these things called regional events as well as field and arc bosses. These will pop up basically hourly, with events showing up on a rotating schedule in the handful of zones across the world. Most of them will amount to kill some number of enemies, collect and turn in some objects and items, and or fight a boss. There is an element of competition as well, where your performance compared to other players will impact and determine how good the rewards you get at the end. And then also, it's extra competitive at times because sometimes these can be PvP flagged, so open field fighting, and there will be guild focused variations as well. Also, those open world dungeons are super cool. I love these in any MMO, and I enjoyed them here as well. Basically hopping into what is almost like a mini raid that's non-instanced and just coming across other players who are trying to take on this difficult challenge, take on these difficult groups of enemies to fight these bosses. It's really fun because it makes for a lot of dynamic moments where you will encounter players struggling and you help them out, and then you group up together and you work towards the boss. I really love this about the genre, and it's done pretty well here. I also think the game has a few nice little touches here and there. There's things like this campfire system, where scattered all throughout the zones will be these campfires that you can go up, light, and rest at them, quickly replenishing your health and mana. That's a nice little touch. Core Punk should take note of this. There's also a lot of grapple points all throughout the world, and you have this grapple hook that you can pull yourself up to. Now, sometimes this is just to get up to that higher elevation, but other times it will launch you way up in the air, which then allows you to make use of the gliding and then just to get to another position, which is really cool. And then the environmental effects, how they change stuff in the world, things like at nighttime, certain enemies and parts of the world will fall asleep. The fact that weather impacts the environment, like filling up bodies of water, changing where you can get access to thanks to swimming, or the fact that it even affects some combat abilities, in particular the staff class, the mage class of this game. Their lightning attacks get super juiced whenever it's raining. Like, that's really neat. So again, some nice little touches. Those are the good, and there again are things I do like about this game, but overall, there was more bad, so let's move into that. For starters, the combat, it's just pretty bad. This was the #1 complaint that I kept seeing crop up over those first couple of days when I was looking at discussion about this game, when I was talking to people about it, and I agree. I think it's one of the biggest issues that I have with the game, and I can see why a lot of people were complaining. Now, they have announced that there are updates coming, which include a revamp to the skill system. I'm just not sure if that's gonna fix the core problems and the issues that have resulted in so many people saying, I think the combat feels bad. So what is the issue here? Well, from what I played so far, I'd say compared to every other tab target and even the hybrid action MMOs, which Throne and Liberty is kind of trying to split the difference, it's simply not as good, smooth, or fluid as a lot of the other games I've played. Targeting is clunky, which I think is a big issue that people often overlook. And I also think there's a bit of latency and lack of responsiveness to everything. Just again, overall, I think the combat feels bad. Now, you will see people reply when this critique comes up saying, but this is a tab target MMO. It's just like every other tab target MMO. It's exactly like WoW. What's the difference? And this is crazy to me. Like, what are you talking about? There are better and worse versions of combat systems in every single genre. The games that stand out as having good combat do so when compared to the games that have bad combat. Like, when people say Bungie makes some of the best feeling first-person shooting, that's because it feels better than other FPS games that feel worse. Just like how not every Souls-like feels as good as the core Souls games. Some do, but many don't. That applies here as well. Just because Throne and Liberty is a tab target game doesn't mean that it is done as well as every other tab target game. Of course not. There's not some magic button that the developers press when making their game that goes boop, you now have a perfectly implemented iteration of your desired combat system that feels just as good as all the best games out there. That's not how any of this works, not at all. Subjectively, I just think Throne and Liberty feels inferior to many of the other tab target MMOs that I've played. Now, why exactly? Well, I'm not a game developer, but there are a few possible reasons as to why this doesn't feel as good subjectively. Good feeling combat in a lot of cases can be boiled down to responsiveness and game feedback. Responsiveness of controls, like how well the character's actions respond to player input and how well or not that is animated, as well as the sounds that coincide with it. And responsiveness of the game servers, where even the smallest delay of 100 milliseconds can result in a feeling of sluggishness, be it moving your character, timing a counter, or casting a spell. I think there's a very good chance that this this game suffers from some level of netcode or input lag for character actions, your attacking and casting spells, as well as character movements, and a potential reason for this could be that focus on the large-scale PvP. It is the case that most games do not run as well as this game does, where there are so many players running around, and especially games that look this good, and my guess is that they sacrificed some of the combat responsiveness in order to get this better performance to happen. I also think that character movement by design is just a bit sluggish. They have added the ability to move in combat, but it is pretty clear, having played over these past few days, that this game clearly wasn't designed with that movement in mind. Nearly every single thing about the combat wants you to stand in place. The incredibly short range of melee attacks, far shorter than what I've played in other tab target MMOs. I think the melee distance is like 1 or 2 meters, where a lot of MMOs will be like 2.5 to 5 meters of melee attack distance. You gotta be on top of your targets to hit them with melee in this game. Also, the small radius of all cone and area of attack abilities in the game currently, and the way they've implemented the parry system. They did add more of a movement focus last year in response to beta testing, but it is obvious that the game was not initially designed to be played this way. Even though I can move while attacking, I will perform vastly better in combat encounters standing still. I did feel more comfortable with the combat as I played more, and I would say that come max level, I was enjoying doing things like AoE grinding packs of enemies or tanking in those group dungeons, but I feel like that might be more a matter of me just getting used to the combat system rather than it actually all of a sudden feeling good, going from feeling bad to feeling good. Now that said, as I mentioned, they have announced plans to fix the combat. This would be the second time they've attempted to fix it, the first resulting in the current iteration that many people seem unsatisfied with, but they are making changes. They are adding this skill expression system for further customization of existing abilities. This looks like it will open up and allow for some new playstyles and attack variations, doing things like increasing the attack range and radius of abilities, making faster projectile speed, removing cast times, turning single targets into multi-target attacks. This will certainly add more interesting variations and options, but I am not certain that it will fix the core fundamental issues of people feeling like this game has bad combat. We will see. Along those same lines, the game makes heavy use of camera smoothing, and it just sucks. It's very noticeable when playing with mouse and keyboard. Basically, every time you turn your camera to look around, there is this acceleration and deceleration that happens on the front and back of that camera movement. Now, this is pretty normal and expected when you're playing with a controller because it feels natural while using a thumbstick to rotate the camera to have that acceleration and deceleration on the front and back. But it feels horrendous when you're playing with a mouse. Now, the good news is this is a super easy fix. They just need to put an option in the menus to disable camera rotation smoothing. Problem solved. You do that, we're all gravy. For as good as the world looks, I also feel like it's all a bit lifeless and soulless feeling. There's like a real lack of character and personality to the play space. A lot of it just feels like a generic fantasy world. It looks pretty, but it feels pretty generic and without much cohesion to it. And also, like, it feels like the enemies were just kind of plopped into position. Like, hey, place enemies so many meters apart within the sand dune, and that's like how they designed it. I don't know. The result of this, though, really is that the world has not felt very immersive for me, and this coupled with the poor combat, I think, is a large part of the reason why I wasn't really motivated to keep playing. I made myself do it, but I wasn't really thoroughly enjoying it. I wasn't immersed in the space, and it didn't feel great to play. And that really killed my motivation. So also, lack of PvE content. Now, I am fully aware I went into playing this game knowing this was a PvP focused game. Even still, I am shocked like how little PvE content is. There's practically nothing. So you've got 6 co-op dungeons and a handful of open world dungeons and then those hourly public events, but that is basically it for PvE in the game. Like, yeah, there's Tadel's Tower, but that is a one-off thing as far as I can tell. You do it once and then you're pretty much done with it forever unless they reset it seasonally or something. So besides doing dailies, doing your contracts and purchasing your time-gated resources and currencies, there's really not much else to do but PvP, and that is fine if you like PvP, right? There will still be plenty for you to enjoy. You'll have months of fun. Well, maybe or maybe not if the global release is anything like the Korean one. So here's a recap of how things went from someone who played The Throne and Liberty when it launched in Korea last December. They said in the first 2 months there were many guilds fighting each other. ZVZ at the time was very chaotic and interesting. Also, because of the chaos, small guilds could join in the battle and have fun as well. However, 2 months later, some guilds gradually withered or merged into bigger alliances, and then the server PvP all of a sudden revolved around 2 to 4 giant alliances. Small guilds at that point had no chance to participate unless they merged. And then at the 3 to 5 month mark, the entire server is left alone or merged into a single alliance that monopolizes all PvP activities. PvP is like a pool of stagnant water. Many players quit the game. Now, this is like a regular problem with PvP focused games, and it seems like Throne and Liberty hasn't done much to mitigate it, or at least that wasn't the case in the Korean launch. Not first-hand experience here. This is second-hand what I'm giving you, but doesn't look well for the long-term lifespan of PvP focused players in this game. Another thing that I was surprised by was how small the game was. So the playable area consists of 2 main regions, and it's just pretty small. I don't know what else to say. I think this is one of the smallest open world MMOs I've ever played in terms of actual play space. There's just not a lot of map to explore here. Now, they do have clear plans to expand. You can already see the zones in the north sketched out, but that's not in the game currently. I don't know what the total time would be, but if I were to guess, I would say like 10 or 15 minutes walking from one end of the map to another. I mean, it's a pretty small game. It is. I was shocked by how tiny this was for an open world MMO. Menus, menus, menus. This game has billions of menus and currencies and progression systems, and I'm not going to run through them all other than to tell you there's a ton of these. There's a ton of clicking through menus and submenus and claiming rewards for completing these things, and I'm just so sick and tired of this being in every new MMO. These free-to-play games are plagued with these multiple reward tracks and progression systems and currencies, and I just think it makes these games demonstrably worse without questions. These games would just be so much better if they got rid of all those menus and if they put all of these currencies and resources and just had them in the game. Like, imagine if I just went out, I killed enemies, I completed quest, and I got rewards without all of these added layers of BS, without the daily time gating for currencies and all this. It's just, I just hate it so much, and this game is plagued with it. And this is not exclusive to Throne and Liberty. Billions of menus and time gated content and billions of crafting currencies and resources, par for the course in the genre at this point, but that doesn't make me any less sick of it. So everything I just went over in terms of negatives is why I'm really not expecting to play too much of this game when it launches later this year. None of that even takes into consideration the pay to win, because in the open beta, players couldn't spend money to accelerate their power progression, but as we know, at launch, you will be able to. It's no secret that Throne and Liberty falls under many traditional definitions of pay to win, although they have been making some slight adjustments for the global launch. One big note is that they removed the blessing, this basically premium optional subscription that will let you run more dungeons every day, which and in turn meant faster progression. That is gone for the global release, although they specified it's gone at launch and it could come back later. But the big thing is that you can still, with real money, purchase Lucent, and that premium currency is the only currency used in the player auction house, and this lets you buy things to speed up your power progression. It is still going to be the case that people who drop a ton of cash will have a power advantage over those who don't for portions of time. Now, eventually, the free players can catch up to the paid players, but there will be windows of time while playing the game where the swipers find themselves ahead, and they're also doing the guild stuff. They are going to have a clear advantage over the people just playing for free or spending a little bit of money. And in a game that has zones that periodically flag for open PvP and dungeons that are full open PvP when it's nighttime in game, and an end game that 90% of its content is focused on large scale PvP, knowing that unless I'm just grinding Throne and Liberty nonstop all day, I will be getting obliterated by swipers at some point in time. No thank you. The game has been like barely fun enough for me to stick around for these 6 days without getting smashed by pay to win players that come launch. The moment this happens, that is probably when I'm going to quit. They'll probably be doing me a favor though. Oh, also, recently they revealed that pre-orders for the game are going to be selling early access bundles. So for $40 and higher, if you feel like spending more, you get to play the game 5 days prior to the official launch. This is always lame whenever any game does it, although they have at least announced that there will be separate launch day servers, so you don't have to play with people who started on the early access servers 5 days earlier. Still, I don't love companies selling early access as a means of inducing FOMO, driving their sales. If your friends are playing Throne and Liberty and they all want to play right away as soon as early access is available, of course you are going to want to purchase that $40 bundle. That is how FOMO-driven marketing works. They are counting on this happening. Now, ultimately, Throne and Liberty is a free-to-play game, I guess, unless you want to play those 5 days early head start. So if any portion of what we've talked about interests you, if anything about what you've seen here interests you, you should check the game out. It's a new game. It's a new MMO. This doesn't happen very often. People like playing these. There's no harm in it. And I'm not here trying to stop anyone from having a good time, but my goal is to share my honest thoughts about what I play. And while there were things that I liked overall this past week, I'm fairly disappointed with Throne and Liberty. I enjoyed my first week of playing New World and playing Lost Ark way more. Those games I was still amped to play on day 2, 3, 4, and 5. That was really not the case with Throne and Liberty. Now, I will give Throne and Liberty a second shot when it officially launches in a couple of months. Maybe those changes that they're making to the combat system improve it enough that I all of a sudden enjoy it. And I am hoping to see more content added to the game and have the world expanded a bit. I actually still can't believe how small the play space is for an open world MMO. This is like the smallest map I've ever played in an MMO. As for the pay to win, well, I mean, that ship is long gone. It's sailed far away. Like that's not changing. You're still going to have the Lucent people paying to power up their progression, and there will be windows of time where they will have an advantage, especially if they're also part of the big guilds farming all the hardest content and controlling all the activities, because this is a PvP focused game. Zones that are flagged for PvP and those open dungeons at night that are flagged for PvP and things that are gated behind those big scale PvP activities. And if you're not a part of those big guilds, if you're not in that large alliance of guilds or whatever, you're just going to be left out of a lot of what this game is offering. There will be an audience for that. This game, of that I am certain, and I hope they enjoy it. I just don't know that I'm going to get very much time out of this title, and that's fine as well. All right, that's it for today. Thanks as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time, and I will update you on Throne and Liberty during the official launch. We'll see if enough changes, and if they remove the pay. No, that's who are we kidding? All right, see you guys later.